All right, and Rennie, welcome aboard to the Catholic Teacher Podcast. Great to have some time with you. Thanks for making time for us.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm pleased to be here.
Now, I know some of my American listeners won't understand this incredibly important question it's central to educators in the Australian state of Victoria. Which Australian rules football team do you support?
I go for the Tigers.
Do
Richmond.
you?
Yeah, yellow and black.
They've had a couple of good years, haven't they?
They certainly have. We've got a fantastic player called Dustin Martin, a couple of other really good players. We've got a really good coach. What Richmond has, though, they're a club who are a community, and they absolutely have each other's back. And I think even more than the football, it's that sense of a collective identity that really pushes them each game.
Yeah, I remember when I lived in Melbourne, I taught for a little while at Marcelin College in Bulleen. It was the last place that I taught.
Yeah.
And I had come from other parts of Australia. And I just remember every Friday, like all the staff would be in team colours. And it was a thing. It was like just a real eye-opener for me how passionate people are down there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we talk about religion. Well, religion is football in Melbourne.
Actually, it's interesting you mentioned it's a community because there's quite a trend actually for clubs to, allow membership to be more and more active. I've noticed that just in a few clubs around the world that the most successful ones are kind of including more of the, the rank and file members and supporters in the whole community.
Yes. Well, I think they're understanding that they don't want to have echelons. We're all in it together a lot. And I think they're understanding we've got to break down these barriers. Supporters are passionate, are vocal. They want their team to win. They want to be included.
So we should talk about something almost as important as Australian rules football, which is Catholic education.
Yes.
And what I wanted to do is we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about your new book that's coming out, which is really exciting, and we want everybody to hear about that. But what I thought we'd do is I love hearing the stories of different Catholic educators, your journey in Catholic education, why you're still there, what keeps you getting up every day and staying involved in the great adventure of Catholic education. So take us through the story.
Well, the story started well over 50 years ago when I went to this particular school, Gennazano in Kew, and I just had wonderful teachers, both professed and lay. And I suppose over the course of my 12 years from prep, I learned to love the school and love the sisters and loved what they represented. And I suppose they taught about a Jesus who was not wrathful, but loving. So I got this sense of joy about being a Catholic. It was a good faith to be in. So I suppose that rubbed off on a fairly impressionable little, holy communicant, but it's stayed there ever since.
And was that part of your home experience too? Was the faith a big part of home life?
Absolutely, yes. Mother and father, and I'm the oldest of 7 siblings, so they were very, very devout Catholics. So we would be trotted along to mass and confession, regularly, and praying and grace and the saints and visiting monasteries. All those things were very much part of my growing up and very normal for the group that I moved in. All my friends were Catholic. It was just what we did. We all came from fairly big families. It was just the norm for us.
And have you looked back at your time as a student there? Can you remember a particular religious sister or lay teacher that stands out for you?
Oh, so many. Sister Mary Rose Dennehy. She taught me in year 12, Lit and Renaissance history. Sister Denise Mulcahy, Sister Joan Cartledge, all of these fabulous women who gave me a little bit of their heart. They what we often talk about in the Catholic education is about being named and known. And I really think they cared for the children and they knew who they were. They were just really fabulous women, good teachers, warm, and they let you be yourself. So I always thanked my parents for my really fortunate education at Gen because it made me who I am.
If you look back at that experience again as a student, what's one big takeaway how did it shape you? How did it sort of shape your spirituality, your experience as a student at a Catholic school like that?
Well, I suppose in my core of being, it just made me a person who was responsive to things of faith. I'd never, and I suppose in some ways I was quite a biddable student, and I liked all the theatre of the church as well. You know, I liked going to mass. I liked singing with the guitar group. I liked all that sort of stuff. So that sense of community and belonging, and understanding, you know, that common understanding between people of a faith, so that when you're travelling, for example, you meet another Catholic who may not even speak your language, but you've got something in common. And I love that universality of the Catholic faith.
That is so true. We've been blessed over the years to do a huge amount of travel. And when I was still teaching, Karen and I got a chance to take a Morris group to Bougainville. And this was back in maybe early 2000s, and the Civil War was still pretty fresh. And, you know, we had this experience of going to mass, and, you know, a lot of the villagers actually would walk sometimes for hours and hours just to get there. And they put on this amazing spread of food that everybody brings. And then we're in this tiny little wooden church. You know, men and women were segregated culturally there. The women sit on one side, the men sit on the other. And the singing was incredible. And, you know, to have been there, to have experienced the faith in Bougainville, and then to have experienced it a couple of years ago, we were in Iceland, and heading to mass in Iceland was extraordinary. So I think you make a great point. Once you really imbibe the faith, you realize how truly Catholic and universal it can be. So let me ask you, once you had your time there, once you'd finished as a student, tell us about your journey into becoming a Catholic educator.
Right. Okay. Well, my journey was a very belated one. As I say to friends, it was very circumnavigational. So I went to university. I went and worked for a couple of years. I went travelling for 8 years, came back, did a writing course, met my husband, got married, thought, well, I better grow up now. I'm, you know, my late 30s, did a dip ed and worked in a couple of other schools. I wanted to work in the Catholic sector because that's where my heart is. And then a job came up. And I thought, well, this is my old school and this is where I started, and maybe I can do the full circle. So I applied and I got the job at Gen in 2008 and have been happy ever since, because I feel I'm giving back to the school that gave so much to me.
All right. So this is what we really want to talk about. Is much of my work, I guess, speaking over the years, the last decade or so, has been around this, sometimes around the issue of teacher burnout, exhaustion. As you would know, there are people who give and give and give, and they're not feeling, they're not being replenished. So it leads to a kind of cynicism and exhaustion. How have you managed to navigate that?
Oh, that's a good question. Look, I think, Jonathan, I have other interests, outside interests, and I think that keeps me balanced. You know, I put a lot into school, as all the teachers I work with do, but I also have outside interests, which sort of I can look to over the weekend or the holidays to provide that balance. So, and that's very important, because I think these days, you know, teachers do put in a lot, and more is expected of them. So there can be that burnout if you don't take absolute care of yourself and be aware of what you're doing and how much you're doing and when to step back.
Yeah, crucial. It's the self-care piece is massive. Sometimes in seminars, I used to, you know, joke with people, you know, show of hands, who's outrageously lavished extravagant self-care on themselves in the last week, and you just get this sound of crickets where you know, people are like, and also I think you make a good point, especially in Australia at the moment, the curriculum is so crowded that it's just, you know, the time that teachers need just to think, to replenish, to read is just harder and harder.
Yeah, to read for professional purposes, but also to read to nourish your own mind, because I'm an English teacher and I'm always talking and using words, and I want more of that so that I can give more. So, you know, I think a teacher is never off. On the weekend, we'll read the paper. Oh, there's an article I could cut out, or there's something I could refer to. Yeah. That's topical. It's the nature of our profession that we're always looking for something immediate or relevant or topical so that we can bring it to the class.
Yeah, and I think one of the other big challenges sometimes that I talk about is often educational experts and people in government have a thought bubble, and before you know it, that thought bubble is a new area of curriculum, and then it's kind of, we're just expecting teachers to it's just cramming that curriculum. It's sometimes it's hard to just have that space and that time to really go deep on topics, and to, especially in literature. So, and on that, what do you love to teach in literature?
Oh, well, I'm teaching year 7 and year 10 at the moment. So again, we're doing the classic To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a fantastic book. And I must have read it about, 5 times. I reread it each year to see what else I can get out of it. And I came across this most beautiful phrase recently when a Scout is talking about her growing up. And she talks about the routine contentment of her childhood. And I'd never struck that phrase before, had never noticed it before, but it really resonated this time. So we're also looking at 12 Angry Men. And in year 7, we're doing a great little novel called The War That Saved My Life, about evacuees from London during World War II, and a little heroine who overcomes lots of obstacles there. So they're great books to study, the classics and contemporary.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, I did double major English in year 12, and we did a lot of Shakespeare. We had a great teacher, and one of our real joys was diligently studying all the best Shakespearean insults. The mastery of Shakespearean insults was a crucial part of my Catholic English literature formation. So
Yes.
I've just started with my daughter. Somebody really got me onto this idea of the Harvard Classics, which is apparently you can get it done in a year. So she's 13 at a Catholic high school, and she's just starting on Benjamin Franklin. So we'll see how we go. But
good. So, cram it in.
Yeah, well, so tell us, what are you most enjoying at the moment with working with young people as a Catholic educator? What gives you most life? What do you enjoy about working with young people?
Well, I think still there's a lot of hope in young people. I think, you've always got to look at their hope, at their sense of, we have got a future and we're going to take it. The other thing about young people is they are much more activist than we ever were. They're really taking on board lots of issues. Perhaps they don't know the depth and the sort of intricacies of some of these issues, but they're taking them on board. And I think over the course of a couple of generations, we will see a better kind of world because of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a big shift, isn't there? It's been interesting to say when it actually really started to kick in. I was reading a pretty scholarly piece today on the risks of ideology, and one of these professors was making the point that one of the best services we can give young people is to help them grasp the nuances of complex topics. I mean, a lot of our media culture and social media culture simplifies and energizes things as though they're incredibly straightforward, but the older we get in life, we realize that there's more grey than we once thought in some things, and there's a lot of nuance.
Oh, it certainly is with me.
Yeah, a lot of this complexity.
And I think it behoves us to step that out for our students as best we can, because they tend to take the big picture and not get the subtlety. So that's one of our jobs, to tease things out and to highlight things and to be a moderator in some ways. Yeah. Because sometimes the kids can go like a bull at a gate at things, and maybe they need to be stepped back. So it's a little bit more thought through.
So what keeps you there at the moment? So when you get up in the morning and you wake up and you're going, I'm going into work today, what keeps you involved with Catholic education?
I think my commitment to certainly the sisters who founded this school, I've got a big commitment to them and what they did. So that is certainly part of it. Also, I think this idea of a community of faith and belief and worship. And I like to think of all the good things the church does. I know we have had some terrible and justifiably bad press for many things, but I also always want to highlight the good things and the good ordinary people who keep us going, the volunteering, the Vinnies, the Caritas, the people who collect on Sundays, all the good nuns and priests and all the people who in many unsung ways are the glue of our Catholic community. So what I get up for in the morning is, yes, I teach my subjects, but I also try to teach a little bit of who I am and give some life lessons about trying to be a good person without being overly preachy, but just talk about faith when it comes up in a relevant sort of way. And, you know, I do talk about being at this school and that formative influence. And I hope in some ways I'm a little bit formative for some of the girls as well. They might remember something, you know.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think they will. I think what you're talking about is modeling, and there's so much stuff in the church documents on education around, you know, one thing that really struck me reading those documents over the years was this idea of environment. They said that if you think of a Catholic school, you know, there's at Gennazano there, you've got the buildings, you've got the rooms. You could have students in there, and you can have desks and chairs, and you could have big screens with piped in educational content. But if you take the teachers out of the school, you don't have a lot left. You don't really have a school. And the documents are really interesting because they say it's the teachers that actually create the environment in a school. And so,
absolutely, create that climate. I think and we at Gen try to create this climate of hope and possibility and innovation and thinking. And of course, we always talk about the relational aspects. We're not just delivering a curriculum. We have a little human being in front of us with all their flaws and foibles and joys and changing moods and upbeat and downbeat and everything. But they are a person in front of us. So we've got to be quite aware that we're not just delivering a topic, we're bringing a person to a new idea.
Yeah. It's about that perspective on what we think a human person actually is. So
Yes.
I used to, in seminars, I used to say, you know, if you look at the worst of the 20th century, if you look at the gulags of Soviet Russia, if you look at the worst of World War II, ultimately what it boils down to is a terribly impoverished vision of the dignity of persons. So what's beautiful about Catholic education is that if we have that deep, rich view of the person, of young people made in the image of God, then we relate to them in a particular way. It's easy for me to say that. I often think, you know, even in a family with 3 young kids, it's like come home and it's like, dear Lord, help me to see the beauty, and you've made them in your image. And most of the time we get there.
Yeah, Jonathan. So, and, you know, not every class is wonderful. There are days when it's not as buoyant and brilliant as you'd hope, but that's the human being. And we all come together and we learn to be forgiving of each other a little bit because, you know, that's the nature of who we are.
What moves you? What sort of, if you look at the challenges you think young people and young women specifically in your context there face, what moves your heart? What breaks your heart for young people at the moment? What do you think are the real issues that concern you or upset you?
Well, what I suppose what breaks my heart is sometimes the lack of confidence that young people can have, boys or girls, because of social media. I think that there's an awful template out there that they've got to look or sound or be or belong or buy or consume or whatever. And that can be very, very hard on a developing young person without, you know, parents and teachers and other strong adults being able to counter that. I think I never had to worry about how I looked when I was growing up. I just grew up and I played netball and I had fun and I had friends and it was all pretty normal. These days, I think there are so many inputs to our children that they're trying to sort of touch and taste them all and they don't know where they are. I think it's very hard these days to negotiate adolescence. So I'm very mindful of that in our Catholic schools, we have time for prayer, for meditation, for discussion, for those things that give us a bit of downtime to just be still if necessary, or to talk through an issue that might be percolating.
Yeah, I've said in so many podcasts over the years that, you know, one of the mistakes we can make in, I guess, youth evangelization is to try and out-entertain the most entertained culture in history, which is like, you know, for a long time it was, how can we, you know, I guess what I'm getting at is that the beautiful gifts of silence, contemplation, stillness. That's the strength, because it's the countercultural thing that so many young people aren't getting. But look, I'm learning. My daughter's 13, and it's a constant discussion. She doesn't have a phone, and believe it or not, she doesn't want one at this stage. So, and she says to me,
"That's fabulous."
Yeah, it's
that's
pretty
a success,
cool,
Jonathan.
Yeah, well, it's the mantra that I often have with her is I say, darling, I say there's not a lot of upside. I said there's, for what it is, it's especially on the social media side. There's for young people. There's I question that there's just, especially for girls at the moment, it's challenging. So
it is challenging.
I wanted to ask you, in a highly technocratic secular culture, how do you help young women encounter the person of Jesus? What do you think is effective? What do you think can work in helping highly secularized, in a very technocratic culture? How do you think Catholic schools can do a good job reaching young people with the person of Jesus and the message of faith?
I think what we do well is do things that are of a justice nature, collecting, provide fundraising, those sorts of things, and always linking it back to the message of the gospel. When I was hungry, those sorts of things. I think we do that very well. I think sometimes the girls get and people get very hands-on with the fundraising, and they do that because they care about the cause. And we have to deliberately draw it back to the Jesus message, to the gospel imperative of loving God and loving neighbour. And that is hard in this secularist, pluralist world, but it is our job and our duty and our joy in some ways to try and bring it back to that first example of Jesus and what he offered.
What do you think he was like?
Oh, well, that's a really good question. I think he was fair. I think he was probably short. And swarthy. He was a Semite after all. I think he probably had loving brown eyes. I think he listened. I think he didn't always have to be number one talking guy. I think he had the capacity to listen and discern and had humility. So his leadership model, that servant leadership model, was exactly who he was. So it wasn't it was nothing about being the biggest and best. It was much more considered and deliberate and kind and shy. But there was something great going on.
Yeah. So
that's the sort of Jesus I believe in.
Have you seen any of the Chosen series?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay,
no.
It's going to mess you up.
Put that on my list.
Yes, and for anyone listening, I know many people have seen it. So The Chosen is a free, though you have the option to contribute. It's like a Netflix binge series about Jesus.
All right, okay.
It is off the scale amazing. So it's not on Netflix, it's an app. So if you get it almost as an app from an app store. It's called The Chosen. You can find it on the internet too. But honestly, it's
pass that on to our RE superiors.
Well, I was listening to you talking, and I thought, I watched the first episode, and I'm not old school, but I'm sort of, people see me as quite a man's man. But I was messed up watching the first episode. I was like, it was deeply, deeply moving. There's a scene there at the start where he reveals just his relationship with Mary Magdalene. It was just extraordinary. So it's been quite profound listening to you talk about your perception of him. It resonated having watched that. So there's some homework for everybody.
Oh, look, Jonathan, I'll have to sign up for it. Yes, and I think the various ways we can get people to access their own spirituality or their own understanding. It's never a one size fits all. And we also understand in Catholic education that some will be with us straight away, some will reject and come back later, some will find another way. And I suppose the big thing is that in our schools, we are invitational and no longer dogmatic. So it's much more inclusive and receptive to where the students are, and in trying to provide answers for them at their particular stage.
Yeah, there's a great quote from John Paul II, who beautifully said that the Catholic Church proposes, she never imposes. I always liked that line. It was, but I think there's a responsibility there too. We've got to get as effective as we can be at proposing the message of faith, and I often think beauty's got a lot to do with that. I think, the ability, beautiful art, beautiful music, a chance to represent that message, that experience of God through that.
I think that's absolutely important. Looking at the great paintings, The Prodigal Son by Rembrandt, or The Last Supper, or any number of paintings, or beautiful music that can take you away from the temporal realm and put you somewhere else, and put you in that godly space. I'm a great one for that. I can waste a lot of time looking at beautiful paintings and reading John O'Donoghue, who's one of my favourite writers. Just Joan Chittister. I love some of the common sense of these people, and the way that you can be lifted. You can be lifted by anything if you want to be.
So true. I love listening to you, because I remember 1994, I was in Liverpool in England, and I was doing a gap year. And I like to say to people that I was over there drinking professionally for Australia. And and I can promise you that I didn't darken the doorstep of too many churches at that time in my life. And I ended up, but I still had a love for art and for beauty, as sort of I'd been exposed to as a kid. And I walked into the Liverpool Metropolitan Gallery, and I was wandering around, and all of a sudden I walked in this little room, and there's this one large painting of Daniel in the lion's den. And this thing just hit me between the eyes. And now years later, I bought one. I got a huge framed one of it. But I remember being incredibly struck by it at that stage in my life. And it's by a French painter called Breton Rivière. And I remember seeing it thinking, Daniel standing there and the lions are cowering, and it's beautifully presented because you can tell that the lions can see something behind him that Daniel can't see. And the lions are like, uh-oh. And I was really moved by that. So at a point in my life, even when I wasn't particularly open to faith, the ability of beautiful religious art to move me was profound.
And I think that can happen at any age, Jonathan, because more recently, it might have been 10 years ago, I was in London and popped into the National Gallery, as I always do, and I came across this most beautiful painting of the Holy Family by a chap called Federico Barocci, and it was called Our Lady and the Family with a cat, and it was Jesus and John the Baptist and Joseph and Mary, and they were smiling and laughing at the carryings on of a little cat. And I just loved it because it wasn't sort of stiff or posed. It was just happy domesticity. And I'd never, so that's in fact by my desk. I've got it laminated by my desk now, and just a happy family as they were.
Well, let me ask you the important thing, because there is some big news. You've been busy.
Oh, yes, Jonathan. Look, because I'm an English teacher, I've always been a bit of a scribbler. And so I've got a book coming out in August called Blessed, Meditations on a Life of Small Wonders. And it's, as I call it, a potpourri or a miscellany of musings, some of which are about faith, but there's life, there's travel, there's education, poetry, writing, my first kiss, family memories, Paris, London, Boston. It's just a whole lot of stuff, some of which has been published. A couple have been published in the mainstream media and are sort of expanded or changed a bit, and a lot of it's completely new. And I suppose it's just because faith and life are the word are what get me going. And of course, I love to show the girls when I'm teaching that I'm writing. So it's that modelling that comes through.
Have you got a copy in your hands yet? Have you had them back from the distributor?
No, not yet. I think that'll be in July. The official launch is in August, so it's a little while away. But I have signed off on the the forward and the font and the dedication. I just did that last week. And it was the first time I'd worked closely with an editor, which was a great lesson for me.
Yep.
Never too old to learn, because I can waffle, I can go on a bit. So sometimes you need someone else just to say, that's enough, or can you add a bit more? So, another eye, another critical friend, really useful. So I'm very happy, Jonathan, with Blessed. I think it'll be a good read. I think it'll take people to some other places. It's probably a book to dip into gently and quietly. There's a bit of poetry. There's a bit of silliness, whimsy. It's me.
And where did the idea come from? Tell us about why you decided to do it.
Well, I had a book published about 10 years ago, The Secret Garden of Spirituality, which sold pretty well. And I suppose as a writer, I'm always looking for avenues to be published. I think that's the reality if you want to write. So I have I've got a little regular column in Australian Catholics, and so I suppose I'm just trying to enlarge and get a larger audience in some ways. So there's some sort of compulsion both to write and write well, but also there is nothing more gratifying than someone coming up to you or emailing you and just saying, I loved what you said.
Yeah.
Or I cut that out, or I put it on the fridge, or I passed it on to a friend, or I read it at a staff meeting. So sometimes, even though we're scribbling away, sometimes the Spirit is behind us and enabling us just to say something good that will catch someone's heart. And other times it's a bit clunk. But, so this book, Blessed, is it's a meditation on a good life that I've been blessed with. And it goes through the ups and not many downs, but ups and downs of my life. It's a part memoir. And just my faith journey, and it talks about stained glass windows and pilgrimages. It talks about motherhood and Mary. It talks about the nuns that I was at school with. It talks about friendships and family and surviving COVID. We try to make it reasonably topical, parts of it, but some of these pieces were written quite a while ago and are being published for the first time. So there is that sense of the evolving person, if you like, as I come and grown up and been a student and a university and travelled and worked. And this is where you find me today.
What's your favourite part of the book?
Oh, that's very interesting. Look, it's really hard to say. There's a little poem I've written about sparrows, which it's a cheerful little thing, and it's about sparrows being prayerful little choristers in some way that remind me that the ordinary person, in being cheerful, contributes to the world.
So true.
There are lots of different things. There's some ruminations on the nature of writing, going to the library and amazing yourself sometimes when you look at your own word and think, did I really write that? And then thanking God because your brain is really working, and you've got something that's enabled you just to grasp a few ideas, a few phrases, put them together, and they're quite lovely. Without big noting, sometimes we all manage something lovely, and that's. I'm hoping some of this and the small wonders of our own lives resonate with readers.
So good. Where do you do your writing?
Oh, well, mainly at libraries. So it's the Baldwin Library or the State Library of Victoria. Sometimes in the holidays, I will go up to Bendigo to my sisters. Sometimes in cafes. Look, not so much at home because home is busy, so I've got to find a room of my own, but that's usually a quiet room at, in a library. The State Library I love. I have a particular spot where I sit whenever I go in there, and it's pretty good because people are quiet and I can just sit there and immerse myself. So
do you ever walk in there and someone's sitting in your spot?
Not often, because I make sure I get missed if they work.
Yeah, exactly.
I get in there at 10. So, and I'm one of these ones that really walks very quickly to make sure no one else gets my spot. And I think people are like that. They begin to recognise and nod. Oh, that's the lady. That's that odd lady who sits in that spot all the time.
Yeah.
That's part of the deal. You sort of you get to know who's who in the zoo.
Yeah, no, the reason I ask you, because when I was writing, I was kind of similar. I kind of have libraries are just such the best place to write most of the time. And you do get very set in your ways. You're kind of like, no, you can't sit there. That's my seat. That's where I sit. I'm writing a masterpiece. Get out.
Yeah, that's right. We get a bit precious, Jonathan, I think.
We do get a little bit set in our ways, apparently, so I'm told. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't,
well, it's the same at Mass. I have a particular spot at my local parish church where I have been sitting for a long time. And, I get a bit, if someone's sitting there. And so I try to get there in good time. So, I mean, of course, I can compromise, but it's a certain side and it's a certain at the back, bit hidden.
I think it justifies the Catholic doctrine of purgatory. Someone sits in your spot at church, that's an extra 1,000 years in purgatory for them right there. And I totally resonate, because I've been getting to adoration again a bit lately. We've got a beautiful church nearby that has a lot of Eucharistic adoration. And just like you, I've got a spot. I've got an exact spot. And, you go in there sometimes and someone's there and you're like, you can't, no, what are you doing? You can't be there. That's my spot. And
it's interesting because so many people at my local church, Holy Redeemer, they are all sitting in the same seats too for years. For years, my dear, I've got a dear friend who does the prayers of the faithful. She and her husband always sit in a certain spot. Another family, a couple of girls I've taught, they're there, and this, and it's really interesting. And people just sort of know, and we're always doing the handshake, the kiss of peace, and it's the same. You're nodding, or these days we're nodding at the moment. We're not shaking hands, but it's the same faces, and that's community too.
Totally resonate. And it's I think some of these things are a chance to grow in holiness, because if I go to adoration, sometimes you sit there and it's I love the silence, right? It's dead quiet, but then someone will breathe loud and you'll be there going, why are you breathing so loud? And they're going, hang on, I'm supposed to be here growing in holiness, and here I am miffed about this person breathing too loud. What do you think they're doing?
I don't know about a whole. I mean, we're all trying to be better people, but we fail a lot.
We do a great deal. It's one of the Now, I wanted to ask you, what do you hope the book accomplishes for people that read it?
I hope that when they read it, they will be thankful for the lives they have, and they will look to God to be thankful. It's got a Catholic orientation, a Christian orientation, but it is for the general reader. But I am hoping anyone who picks this up will say, well, this woman's got some common sense. She's telling her story with gratitude and with joy, and a bit of a pep in a step mainly. And they'll say, oh, look, I like that phrase. I'll write that down. And maybe they'll share the words with other people. So I hope it's a book that's passed around. And I suppose it's a book who said, if anyone picked it up and they know me, they'll say, yep, that's Anne. That's exactly who she is. So there's that authenticity, I think, in it.
I think you make a really good point before, where you say that, sometimes it's just the smallest things, a particular piece of writing that, 1,000 people could read it, but the Holy Spirit eventually uses it to impact a particular. And I think it's something that I've been calling for years, God's economy. And I say to people that human economy is always around the idea that bigger is better. So more is better than less. More famous is better than less famous. Bigger is better than smaller. But I often think that God's economy, he looks at what we do in our humble attempt to cooperate with grace. Yeah. And I don't think there's a lot of difference between some of the big fancy things that can be done in the kingdom of God and turning out a great phrase that shifts somebody's life in a fractionally different direction.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Jonathan. And in fact, the opening it talks about the incremental and the shy, and instead of the biggest and the brightest, it's all about small things rather than a triumphal, breast beating, better. So it is about noticing, listening, leaning in, looking at the bunch of roses. It is perhaps the smaller, more ordinary things that we sometimes dismiss that can give us joy. They are our days.
Yeah. Yeah, I can think of a few key moments in life where somebody said something in passing that was a throwaway line that can really stick and stay with you and move you in a new direction. So I guess that's what prayer's about. I guess if we try to grow in grace and sacrament and prayer, that we're at least allowing the Holy Spirit a bit more of a shot at moving us in the right direction to help other people, right?
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes I'll say to the girls, look, last night I sat in my chair and I did the examine, and I sort of went through my day and I tried to sort myself out a bit. Did I do something well? Did I do it badly? Could I do it better? Can I be forgiven? Thanks for this day, and I'll try again tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I don't rattle on about prayer, but I do talk about the importance of those moments of stillness where you just are with yourself and with God, and you have a sifting and sorting.
I always like the quote from Basil Pennington, who's a great master of contemplative prayer, and he famously said his advice for prayer was, pray as you can, not as you can't.
Oh, yeah, good one. Yes, exactly.
I always like that.
So true. And I'd say to the girls, girls, God doesn't worry about grammar or punctuation. The intention in the heart comes first, and it doesn't matter if it's stumbling or inarticulate. He knows what you need.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the great things about the Catholic faith is that we have so many amazing men and women saints whose spirituality was so remarkably different. You've got your cerebral military Ignatius, and then you've got your Therese of Lisieux, and they're both having these profound experiences of faith and prayer, just in very different spiritualities. So Now, as we wrap up, I wanted to ask you a couple of last things.
Yes.
We're going to put links to the book in the show notes and on the website, but is it with Laneway Press?
Laneway Press, yes. That's based in Abbotsford in Victoria. Yep. It'll be launched in August. So, yes, it's Blessed Meditations on a Life of Small Wonders. And I'm very thrilled that my sister, Fiona, has done the cover art. So It's a little bit of a family effort.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping that it will sell well, but people will take a bit of my heart to them, and it might just go out and good words, uplifting words, affirming words. Nothing too heavy. It's not a philosophical treatise. It's just some words from, as it says on the blurb, a woman who's trying to wise up.
Wow. So good. All right. So it's Laneway Press, Blessed, and we'll put links directly to it. Last couple of questions. What are you looking forward to in the remaining time you have in education? May it be long, by the way.
Oh, yes, I hope I've got a few years left. Look, I think there will be changes. I think there will be, I'm hoping that things will be less regimented and more workshop-like. I think that needs to be done. I think sometimes kids sit in classes where they are not engaged, or it's just something that they will never take with them. So if we can get to an educational stage where we're finding what the gifts and talents are earlier, and it's a bit more invitational. I know there are basics which must be learned. I'm ever for literacy, but I'm hoping it won't be quite so timetabled. There might be room for later starts and workshops, and maybe 4 days a week. There might be, the odd Zoom lesson at home. There are ways we could do this better. I certainly think the importance of a campus is essential, though. I think that the whole idea of a school is we are a community, so we mustn't lose that. But there are ways of loosening some ties which enable people to come back.
You're onto something, because one of the other hats I wear in another business is around global macro finance and crypto economics and blockchain strategy. And one of the things we look at is, the highly disruptive nature of technology in general. And education is, as you know, already being disrupted by it, and it's going to happen more. But, and it's a big but, I think you make a crucial point about the need for campus-based human interaction. We, as a species, we've been hominids for multiple millions of years, and we've evolved to be together. And there's only so much Zoom. 100%. There's only so much Zoom you can do.
That's right.
And all right, my last question. This is a challenging one. Okay.
I
want to finish on
I'm
this.
ready.
And there's no presumption, and I think it's a good question. Is what would you like your legacy to be in your journey of Catholic education? If you could have some influence or some sense of summarizing the legacy you'd like to have had in your journey, what would it be?
I think I would like, in 40 years' time, when the girls are having a bit of a reunion, saying, I remember what Mrs. Rennie said, or she had some good ideas, or do you remember when she said that? And she was consistent. She was kind. She did her best for us. And I suppose with the books, and this is perhaps a little ego, I want my words to live beyond me. I want my daughter to be proud, and my granddaughter and great-granddaughter to have a copy of the books and things that I've written, and they'll say, wow, that makes good sense, or that is, if not profound, it's common sense. So I suppose in a life, we always want to leave something. So something of your heart and something of who you are. And yes, that's what I would hope. That
So
my legacy is something of me that was good, that people can remember fondly.
Wow. It's almost profoundly countercultural now, because so much of our culture is about, look at me, validate me, notice me. But I think what's beautiful in what you're saying, and what's central to the heart of a Catholic teacher, is how do I contribute? How do I pass on encouragement and blessing? How do I, Steve Jobs used to talk about putting a dent in the universe, which I think is a bit of hubris, but I think if we can, I don't think we need to worry about dents in the universe, but I think if we can send out some ripples of encouragement and participate in the love of God, right? Like participate in what he's trying to do in the cosmos, I guess.
Yeah, well, we're part of that continuum. John Henry Newman talks about being part of the continuum, and that's exactly what I am. I'm part of the Catholic continuum. I am proud to be a Catholic, to pass on what I know, and just to do my best. I'm just, as he says, I'm a link in a chain.
So good. And I'm thinking also on that of Chesterton's famous Democracy of the Dead. When you started talking about the sisters that taught you all those years ago, they get a vote. In Chesterton's idea of the Democracy of the Dead, it's that all of those that came before us in the Catholic faith and in the Catholic education, they get a vote, in the sense that their legacy is something that we could be proud of continuing too. So
absolutely.
like
I love it that I can do the work of the order, the Faithful Companions of Jesus, and just talk about our foundress and talk about the good things that she did, and that story is retold in our classes, and some of it will link on, and the girls understand, well, this is who we are, this is our inheritance in faith, so what can we take forward?
So good. So can people find you anywhere else, or should they be looking at Laneway Press, or do you have an AnneRennie.com or anywhere else people can find you?
Look, there's really at Laneway Press is the best. Anne.m.Rennie on Instagram, also on LinkedIn. I've recently rejoined Facebook, but that's a bit woo. So look, I'm not So yeah, I'm just learning all this stuff again for promotion of the book, and it's fantastic. The publisher is really helping me with some of these new things that I'm not so familiar with. So I'm rounded about in Google. Okay. You can Google me, and I come up.
We'll find you. Okay. It's interesting. Facebook, you probably don't know this, but I had 2,000 Catholic teachers in a Facebook group. And about 2 years ago, I went to log in 18 months ago. Couldn't get in. Banned the whole thing. Just Facebook shut it down. And I can promise on my father's grave that whole thing, that whole Facebook group had never had the slightly contentious thing about anything. It was nothing but encouragement and motivation. And someone at Facebook just decided that there was no space for Catholic teachers on Facebook. So I've never been able to get back in. So I never even got to say goodbye. So they're interesting tools.
Yeah, aren't they? And we have to be alert as to how they can stop discussion and stop dialogue, and we have to alert our students to the fact that, some of these things are, if not dangerous, they can stop the civility or the dialogue we need between each other. So it's interesting. Yeah, we have to tread carefully.
Yeah. But on a happier note, Anne Rennie, author of new book from Laneway Press, Blessed, thank you so much for making time for us today, and really best of luck with the launch. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And thanks for all you've done for Catholic education over the years.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to be doing much more over the coming few years too.
Awesome. Thanks, Anne.